Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the next edition, maybe even a bit of an adventure, into the Stanley Jones Radio School for Fully Alive Living. And this is a new beginning in some ways, because I've decided that after 30-some ventures with the video, it's time perhaps to think about going to audio only, and to see if that might be effective and helpful and useful to you. So you won't see this, you'll just simply have the opportunity to listen. You see, because faith comes by hearing, and perhaps just by putting my voice out there and not my face, there will be more attention to what I say than to how I perform, or how I might act, or how I might look. Let's see if that works. Now, part of that goes back to many years ago when I was just beginning as a Jesus broadcaster. That's what I was, a Jesus broadcaster. I, after many years of teaching, went to CBS, the big school, and the Browning Institute, which taught me how to be a radio guy. And then I began my work with Trans World Radio, broadcasting the Jesus story all around the world. And one of the stories we discovered was something like this. Much of our ministry at that time was to the vast regions of Brazil. And it was in Portuguese. Now, I was not one of the Portuguese speakers. In fact, the way things worked is that the people who spoke in each of the different languages actually had to be native language speakers. So I could only speak in my native language, and that was to the English broadcast that went around the world. But here's what we heard, that many years ago, the radio program began, and it was a sensation. Particularly in the villages throughout Brazil, we heard stories of people gathering around in the early morning before they would go to work in the jungles, or later in the evening after the breakfast, dinner, supper, evening meal had all been cleaned up. And they would take time to gather around a little radio that was hooked up to an old car battery. And there was only one of them in the village, so they would always sit around and listen to it together. Well, that went on for a number of years, but eventually some radio programs began to, people began to discover there was television. And of course, that was a sensation. And many of those who could, of course, would also watch the television if they could, rather than listen to the radio. However, there was a story that said that one time someone asked a young boy how he liked the television. And he said he did like the television. But then he said, but I really like the radio. And the interviewer was surprised. Well, why would you like the radio better than the television? And he said, because the pictures are better. In radio, the pictures are better. And of course, I think you get what he was all about. You see, sometimes when we have just the voice, we get to imagine, bring into our world pictures that are familiar and friendly and are what we are used to. And so for him, the pictures are better. And sometimes I've discovered that it's much easier to actually allow the imagination that God has given us. That is a God gift thing. And so sometimes when something is heard, the Holy Spirit and our imaginations can give us far greater and far better pictures as we hear the Word. That's important. Not just having the Word read, but heard. Faith comes by hearing. And throughout my broadcast life, I've oftentimes said, and this is a bit of a radio prejudice where I say, and remember, if it's important, it may need to be written down and read. But if it's really important, maybe it needs to be heard. So that's what I'd, with your permission, like to do. So that's the story of how we begin, but let's begin. Indeed, it's time for the Stanley Jones Radio School to begin. More and more, I want this to be less about me and more about Stanley Jones. You see, I've discovered that even though Stanley Jones has left an incredible legacy of books and writings and some recorded work, the people who are very much involved in that, we oftentimes have our own agendas, and we certainly give credence and legacy and credit to the stories of Stanley Jones, but just like me, sometimes we can just use that as a way to take off on our own things, on our own ideas. What I decided to do today was go to a book that is now very important to me because I'm working with a number of people. Many of them are Christians, but not all. But they're all people who have some deep convictions about the deep need for transformation in our world. Yes, real transformation, not just change, not just adjustments, not just some improvement, but transformation. And I surprised many of them. I surprised them when I pointed out that many years ago, a gentleman named Stanley Jones wrote a book called How to Be a Transformed Person. And they were amazed that this Christian evangelist knew so much about transformation. And many of them got a copy of the book. And even those who sometimes had trouble with the idea of it being a spiritual thing, they had to admit, boy, there are some really good ideas there about transformation. So here's what I did. This is week 41. And those of you who have many of the Stanley Jones books knows that basically every book was written as a kind of daily devotional. And so here I am. It is week 41. That's right, week 41, Sunday. And it's referring, go back and read this if you wish, Luke 12, 13 through 15. And now, here are the words of Stanley Jones. We come now in our meditation to the transformation of the material. When we face the material, we face this sharp issue. Either we will transform the material into the image of the spiritual, or the material will transform us into its own image. Some allow the material to get the upper hand. They begin to serve mammon. They begin to look like their God. They become materialized. The light dies out of their eyes. They were born a living soul and have become only living flesh. They can repeat the words of Edna St. Vincent Millay, I cannot say what love have come and gone. I only know that summer sang in me a little while, and in me sings no more. The winter of materialization sets in, and that is a very frosty winter. Two corpulent people, a man and his wife, who by their querulous attitudes at the table were evidently frustrated and unhappy, sat in the lounge on board ship, staring vacantly, doing nothing but staring, when one of them got up and walked to a vase on the mantel, looked at it, came back to his wife and said, "It's empty." My inward comment was, Yes, it's empty, and so are you. They had nothing, absolutely nothing but money. Actually, money had them. The story goes of a leopard who was shot and his skin made into a coat and hung in a shop window with a price mark of several $1,000s. It just so happens that the rest of the family of leopards out walking stopped at the window and recognized the skin of their father. The comment was, "He was better off when he wasn't worth so much. At least he was alive." Many find an inner deadness as a result. They acted as if they owned their wealth and found in dismay that their wealth owned them. I've learned how to make money, but I've not yet learned how to live, said a very sadly disillusioned multimillionaire who could see no open door but suicide, and he entered in. He couldn't live with a materialized soul. Then, of course, there's a little simple prayer. Oh God, you've made us in your image, and we cannot live if we try to live in the image of the material. Save us from trying. And then, of course, the affirmation for the day. Since the center of my faith is in the Word become flesh, now my flesh and my material possessions must become Word. Now, as I often used to say in radio, when somebody comes on and they have something very, very good to say, a smart radio announcer does the smart thing. They just shut up for a while. And you know what? That's a little bit of what I feel like. Yes, I want us particularly not just to think that we are living out the legendary activities of Stanley Jones, but this was an exceptional man. And any of us who are seeking to be Stanley Jones wannabes better be careful, because he paid the price for transforming wisdom. He paid such a price that most of us would never be able to even come close. I oftentimes encourage myself, and as this program continues, that we would like to have young men and women, particularly young men and women right now. There are very few of us who knew the man as he was. As I oftentimes say, the real soul, S-O-L-E, and soul, S-O-U-L, survivors. But part of our mission here is to make sure that deep inside of us we have some of the wisdom, insight, and truth of Stanley Jones. And perhaps we can take some time, from time to time, to see if we can't help the younger generation, 2 or 3 generations younger than many of us, to get a touch, a taste, and indeed, a taste and flavor of the wit, the wisdom, the smile, the humor that characterized a man who made the gospel, the good news, which is, here is God's wisdom and here is the Jesus story. That's what the gospel is. It's God's special wisdom for you and me. And it's brought to us as we surrender to the story man, the Jesus story man. There we go. There we are. Here I am and there you are for this Sunday evening. I don't know how this is going to continue. The fact that we may find ways to do this every week, if people can help us do that, I would be grateful. On the other hand, maybe it's a way for other people besides me to participate, and maybe we could come to the point where perhaps on the weekends we have a 15 or 20 minutes of thought, a little homily, but maybe throughout the week from time to time we would just take a moment, 2 or 3 minutes, maybe sometimes fewer than that, and just simply have a word of wisdom, a W-O-W, a wow. I go to a church that blesses me dearly and deeply. Many times I actually come out of the church because of the music, because of the incredible spirit that's there, and I just say, wow. Did you have that experience in your church today? Wow. Words of worship, words of wisdom, words of awesome truth, words of true wealth. Wow. That's what can happen when men and women who are deeply moved by the Spirit speak it well, live it well, and share it well. And we are hoping that in some ways we can keep that tradition going. Thank you for your time. Please reach out to me at stan@witradio.net, stan@witradio.net, and we come your way thanks to the wonderful work of the Stanley Jones, the E. Stanley Jones Foundation. Please make a point of pointing to them. They have the words, the books, the resources, and the way that you can become truly maybe a living encore of the Stanley Jones story. Till next time, whenever that might be, God willing, bye for now.